Welcome, everyone. Thanks, everybody, for joining. We'd like to welcome you to the second webinar in our four-part Bricz webinar series entitled Merchandising Meets Supply Chain. I'll introduce myself first, and we'll do the introductions to the rest of the team here as well. I am PJ Spitznagel, and I am a supply chain leader here at Bricz, where I've been leading the development of our strategy around supply chain and solutions for the customer experience economy. And our webinar series is centric to this new retail paradigm that we've seen across our retail clients. And today we'll be spending our time together diving into how retail inventory planning and supply chain teams within retail organizations really need to collaborate to ensure a cohesive, unique, memorable customer experience. And like I mentioned, this is something that as we've worked with our retail clients in the last 4 to 5 years, that keeps coming up, and we have a lot of experience in talking with and working with those clients to both address and discuss these challenges. And so with that, I want to take a moment to introduce our two panelists today, Parth and Kevin. So Parth, I'm going to start with you. Can you share with the audience a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. Thanks, PJ. Hello, everyone. I'm Parth Pitani. I'm a supply chain leader here at Bricz. I'm helping clients in logistics and supply chain space. My primary focus on different engagement is to move products from port to point of consumption cheaper and faster. And I look forward to discussing challenges and best practices today in this omnichannel world with you all.
Awesome, Parth. Thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Kevin, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, thanks, PJ. Thanks, everyone, for joining today. My name is Kevin Quigley. I help lead our omnichannel practice here at Bricz. My background involves delivering supply chain strategy and solutions across the omnichannel order management and demand forecasting and replenishment spaces. And this is predominantly in the retail vertical. Also very excited to talk to everybody today about this issue we've really been seeing across a lot of the retailers that we deal with, and that issue is the divide between merchandising and supply chain teams. So,
thanks, Evan. Thanks for joining. I'm really interested to hear what both of you guys have to say as we get into the conversation today. So, with that, now I'm going to introduce us as an organization. So, we are Bricz. We are headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. Our primary focus is to help retailers and our retail clients with supply chain technology enablement, implementation, optimization. There's a team of 35 of us in both India and the United States working with our clients. And in recent times, we have noticed a whole new type of paradigm and a whole new set of challenges that's emerged in the supply chain space and we're really interested to share with you today what those challenges are and the ways we see our customers try to address them. And here's a slide of our customers. You guys are probably well aware of these clients and the kind of retail initiatives they're currently undergoing to really embrace this concept of getting products to the customers faster and more efficiently and as conveniently as ever. So we are going to get into more details about that as we get into the conversation. So to those on the phone, thank you guys so much for joining. And please feel free at any time to type any questions or comments that you may have in the bar to your right for us to talk through in the last 10 minutes together. We definitely want to keep this a back and forth conversation and keep this interactive as possible. So please, by all means, share what points or questions you have. So with that, we're going to go ahead and jump right in. And we'll start with a review of our last webinar that we did, the part one of the webinar series. So the main purpose of that was to really talk about this concept of expedited delivery, especially in the post-Amazon world. At the time when we had the webinar, the established standard was 2 days. And as we all probably are well aware, in the last few weeks, that's even changed, and now it's 1 day as the new standard. So we talked a little bit about, what are the realities around that and how fast it really needs to be. And by the way, if you do want to see that webinar, you can absolutely do that. It's available for streaming online, so we do invite you to do that, so that you can kind of bring yourself up to date with what we discussed last time. So anyway, continuing. So we talked about that strategy around meeting 1 day or 2 day delivery, and we talked more about really the customer experience as well that retailers have to embrace today with the new digitally native customer. That most shopping experiences, whether it's in store or purchased online, it does start online and then usually moves to the store. And it's important that that experience is very cohesive and aligns with the demands of the customer. And finally, we talked about the actual evolution of the supply chain that needs to happen to embrace the customer experience economy, and talked a little bit about what that network looks like. And we'll get into a little more details about that. We'll review that concept, this concept of an urban fulfillment network, a little bit later in the presentation. The overall conclusion from that session was really that to really achieve what we just outlined is the need to break down silos within retail organizations. And the key pieces that we see here are the retail planning, merchandise planning, inventory planning, what have you. Those teams, which traditionally has been focused on the brick and mortar side of things, but now there's this whole concept of getting all these products to the customer fast as ever before. So that's a key piece now of the puzzle. They need to work very closely, of course, with the supply chain side of the organization, because they're the ones that are actually executing this last mile fulfillment. So they need to work together. And then there's the customer experience side of things, which these departments have really become important in the last decade or so, to really ensure that they are the forward-facing, side of the organization and creating a cohesive experience. And all three of these organizations really need to work together. And today we're going to talk about the kind of challenges that emerge out of that and some best practices around what we have seen with our retail clients to address those. So with that, Parth, you're representing the supply chain side, and Kevin, you're representing the planning and omnichannel side. So we know this concept of omnichannel. We're all very well aware of the concept of omnichannel, right? Of ensuring that all your channels act cohesively together as one, and however the customer wants to receive the product, whether it's in store, buy online, pick up in the store, or ship from store, or ship to the customer's home, all that needs to be seamless and in line with the customer expectations. So, omnichannel, Parth, what is that word, what does that concept mean to you from the supply chain side of the organization?
Sure. Thanks, PJ. So when we talk about omnichannel, honestly, it's like opening the floodgates, right? Omnichannel to me personally is a sales term, where a retailer will provide multiple sales channels like website ordering, mobile cell phone app ordering, call center placements, or in-store purchases. But really things get really interesting when we say omnichannel retailing. Now, retailers have to marry up their front end, which is aka omnichannel sales channels, cell phone, website app, applications, with the back end supply chain and logistics, right? So that's the really interesting part when we say omnichannel retailing. Nowadays, retailers are expected to make their supply chain agile and responsive versus the old methods of pushing the inventory to stores.
Right, yeah.
And honestly, these expectations are pushed upon or forced upon by interesting concept, as you mentioned, like 2-hour delivery, buy online, pick up in store, or buy online, or honestly deliver wherever you like. So in previous years, retailers already made huge investments in making up their customer facing sales channels like cell phone app, websites, top notch, but they forgot to bring the logistics along the ride on it. And as a result, we are seeing more and more retailers struggling with the challenges from omnichannel retailing, which is eventually hurting their customer experience. And I think I'll end up with a personal struggle, and I think many on the phone will relate to me, is that I placed an order for custom shoes 4 days before my birthday, and the website said I should be able to get it within 1 or 3 days if I do the expedited shipping. And I paid for expedition. I was really happy. The website was seamless. I had very good customer experience using their website. But unfortunately, shoes didn't arrive before my birthday. So where does this leave us, right? This was really frustrating for me. I was upset, and I probably won't go to the retailer again because they promised me something they were not able to deliver. And this is the real challenge that we are seeing with omnichannel retailing. Website is top notch, and they need to bring supply chain and logistics along the ride with them.
Yeah, that's a great point, Parth. It's, there has been a lot of strides that retailers have made from the front end customer experience, but the supply chain has to be able to keep up, and they have to be at the table with those guys. They need to bring the backroom capabilities to match that experience, and that's really good. And I've had a pretty rough experience myself. I remember what your anecdote just kind of reminded me. I remember I ordered some Sperry's for my dad for Christmas about 3 days before, and about 1 day before, I got an email just saying from the retailer, who shall remain nameless, that I would not be getting the shoes, and so sorry, and they gave me a refund. So I hate Christmas shopping already, and that just made it even worse. I love my family, but I don't like Christmas shopping. Anyway, thanks, Pars, for that point. So omni-channel now. Let's talk omni-channel from the retail planning side of things. So Kevin, you want to shed some light on that side?
Yeah, so omni-channel or multi-channel or unified commerce or whatever your buzzword is that you want to use today. Simply, to me, it means being able to fulfill customer demands no matter where they are. So this is everything from buy online, pick up in store, to ship to address, to splitting orders and shipping to multiple addresses. It's really all about that customer experience at the end of the day. And being able to offer all of these options, not just from like you mentioned, Parth, not just from a front end, but then being able to actually fulfill all of these is extremely important in today's world. So to me, from a retail planning side of things, I look at it as really one word, and that word's convenience. So providing the convenience to the customer, and that means having inventory available to fulfill the demand wherever that customer may be, right? So if they want to buy something online and walk into a store and pick it up, or if they want to buy something in a store because they don't have their size and they want that to be shipped to them at a later time, really having all of those options to provide that convenience back to the customer is key. And you look at it not just from a fulfillment perspective, but also from a returns perspective. Being able to purchase something online, walking into a store, exchanging it for a different size. Really all of these different options need to be available to customers.
Yep, definitely. Yeah, and your point about convenience is really, really right. We see a lot of retailers that we've worked with before, they kind of get bogged down in checking the boxes of, we omnichannel means this, we got to do BOPIS, we got to do. That's important, it is, but you really got to, at the end of the day, you got to take a step back and ensure that the customer experience, whatever you do, you're providing a convenient, well-executed customer experience.
Yeah, and I think the first point of that too is really understanding your customer to really understand, what their needs and what their desires are.
Yep, definitely. Just a quick reminder for everyone out on the phone: if you do have any points or questions around the kind of challenges we're talking about, we'd love to hear from you. So with that. We talked a lot about omnichannel, and another concept that's kind of emerged out of that is, and this is something that we've specifically seen our clients working to implement, and that is the concept of what we're calling the urban fulfillment network. The urban fulfillment network can comprise of both dedicated fulfillment centers, which we're seeing a lot of retailers starting to embrace this concept of a metro or an urban fulfillment center by having actually local fulfillment centers in the urban areas to fulfill customers. And a lot of times that's mixed in with stores as well, because stores are now being viewed as potential and key elements of a supply chain that can get inventory closer to the customer and ensure that speed to guest is as fast as possible. There's a lot of challenges, though, around implementing that, and we're going to talk a little more about that. One of the biggest challenges we see is inventory, and we'll get into more detail as the conversation evolves. So with that, kind of what you guys were talking about is that to embrace this, it's really becoming a problem with the entire retail organization. Mm-hmm. It's not just supply chain anymore, because it used to be just supply chain. Now it's supply chain, it's retail, it's customer experience. It's aligning all of that together and making sure that everyone's in sync and executing to the level that the customer expects. So the next, I want to take the conversation from now is to really get into what those challenges are. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times what we'll see is these challenges are interrelated from each department. Kevin, you'll have specific challenges from the planning side that you see from customers, and you as well, Parth, on the supply chain side, but I think in a lot of cases they're pretty interrelated. So let's jump into that. The first challenge that we see, and we'll go to you, Parth, from the supply chain side that I think you see a lot is, and this is a fundamental flaw a lot of times that we see with retailers, but it's something that really needs to be addressed and still needs to be addressed with a lot of organizations, and that is the lack of true inventory visibility. So, Parth, you want to elaborate on that a little bit? Tell us about that.
Sure, PJ. Important problem, right? So let me start with the statistics that I recently read, that in this customer experience economy, 88% of consumer research the product before they make an in-store purchase. And due to this, it's imperative that a retailer storefront are inconsistent with their brick and mortar location, right? So think about this. After investing a valuable time in looking for a shirt that you wanted for a big day, probably, and you walk into a store to find the product that you knew from your research that it is available in the store. But when you walk, it's not there, right? Mm-hmm. You are frustrated, and you might end up buying the shirt from other competitor, right?
Definitely.
So where does this leave us? This basically lack of inventory visibility cause a real-time implication for that retailer, hurting the customer experience and probably losing customer for life.
Yep.
Right? So important question here to ask is, like, inventory visibility has been or will remain a long time issue, but what are the challenges in attaining this visibility or complete visibility across the supply chain, right?
Yep.
So one major cause that we have seen with many clients is they use a variety of system, processes, people without any real integration or interactions, right? This goes back to my earlier point of bringing back the back end in line with the front end, right? So supply chain can attain visibility only if all the factors within the supply chain, be it the distribution center, be it the store, or be it the planning sector, space, are in constant interaction with each other. And on a good side, we have been seeing clients fixing this visibility challenge or the problem from a systems perspective in the start. There are many clients who are moving from traditional EDI interchange between the system to a real-time API information exchange.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is interesting because, coming from the supply chain side, you're talking about stores, right? Well, traditionally, where maybe the supply chain team didn't necessarily focus on the concept of the store, but now it's a key part of the supply chain, especially if you're doing ship from store. So that's really interesting. So this problem that you just talked about, Parth, it will definitely have a cascading effect down the line, and it will affect you, Kevin, as well.
Yep.
Through a challenge of, if you don't have inventory visibility, how can you possibly have accurate forecasting? And that's a huge piece on your side, of course, is the retail planning side. So you want to talk a little bit more about that challenge?
Yeah, I think, Parth brought up a really big issue that we see today, and it's visibility, right? Not just inventory visibility, but also visibility to your customer demand patterns and really understanding, the different factors that are going to drive your forecast and your planning into these retail stores in different locations. So, if your current view of inventory isn't correct, then how do you know how much you need to purchase for a certain item for a certain store? So I really love the urban fulfillment network, that depiction that you showed on the last slide. I think it really shows how complex the supply chain is becoming today, and ultimately is making forecasting much more complex, increasingly difficult as we're adding. You think about a traditional fulfillment network where you have maybe one distribution center where you're replenishing stores and somebody's walking into your retail store and picking something off the shelf and then walking out, right?
Right.
Then, kind of the next level of that was introducing e-commerce. So now we're seeing maybe you have one dedicated distribution center that's fulfilling e-commerce.
Yep.
You're still replenishing through stores, right, through a different DC. But then, you have some added complexity with e-commerce. Now we're seeing, you showed on that urban network fulfillment slide, we have not just one DC fulfilling e-commerce anymore, but we're opening up store fulfillment locations, regional distribution centers, really trying to get as close to the customer as possible. So no longer are we trying to forecast and plan for one DC and a network of retail stores, but it's really trying to take all of that and put it together, and really understand, demand and plan for forecasting at all of those locations.
Yep, definitely. And so with those points you made, can you talk a little bit more about, the systems that retailers have in place today, traditional retail planning systems, what have you. What are they doing, if anything, to address that challenge?
Yeah, so I think two things. One, some to most retailers aren't addressing this problem yet, and they're trying to manage these in silos. So they're having their retail replenishment handled separately from their e-commerce distribution because they're two very different concepts, right? Like how you're interacting with a customer through direct-to-consumer type shipments is very different from your traditional retail replenishment. When
definitely.
you talk about some of the systems where you're planning, a lot of these, what they're doing is they're aggregating the demand at the store or the node level up to a higher level, which makes it easier to forecast and you have a lot more accuracy. But, ultimately, they're not forecasting at the point of consumer demand, right? So when you're trying to plan into these stores and understand really how many units of a certain SKU you need to hold in that store for the future, you're not really getting an accurate view if you're aggregating that up.
Yeah. By the way, thank you for telling me you liked my slide. I worked very hard on it. And unfortunately, I'm going to make you keep talking. But the next question that we'll talk about is we talked a little bit about the inventory side of things, right? So that kind of evolves into, and we talked a lot about both Parth and you, Kevin, have talked about the store being an important element of the supply chain now for online and in-store fulfillment. But that does create a battle in-store between both online and walk-in purchases. So, what do those challenges mean to you, Kevin? Like, shed a little more light on that.
Yeah, so I think a few things. One is really understanding, going back to the data, right? Understanding where the actual customer demand is versus where you're fulfilling that demand from. So let me give you an example, right? Somebody is on their way home from work and they want to buy, let's go back to the pair of shoes example, right? They want to buy a pair of shoes and they want to pick it up on their way home from work because that's the most convenient location for them. When you're looking at forecasting future demand, trying to understand, is this customer really going to be purchasing this pair of shoes from this location again, or is it just because, that day that was the most convenient location, right? So understanding, from a ship to address, potentially, that customer would like to order from, or maybe they usually pick up their orders at a store that's closer to their home. But really trying to understand these different demand points and how they impact your forecast is huge. And then the other point too, which is a real problem today, is now that you're opening up a lot of stores to the e-commerce site, so your inventory that you're holding in stores, you're going to expose to the web and ultimately have those stores fulfill web orders. Now, inventory that you had planned for that store originally is now being used to fulfill an order that might not have been planned for that store. So kind of understanding how the different nodes within the network are borrowing inventory almost to fulfill other orders, and really where you need to position that inventory in order to handle both your e-commerce volume as well as your traditional retail volume.
Yeah, exactly. It's a huge challenge for sure. So what this creates for you, Parth, and kind of like we've mentioned multiple times about ensuring that inventory is balanced correctly in the store, and now the store is a key element of the supply chain. And not only that, but you have that segment of the supply chain plus possibly third-party providers as well, and your own dedicated fulfillment centers, and that creates sort of segments in your supply chain with varying levels of reliability or process on how to fulfill online orders, and that can be pretty challenging, right?
Yeah, PJ, definitely. So that's that's the challenge that because of this omnichannel world. So the overall goal in a supply chain is to move products faster and cheaper, right? So as a result, retailers are working with multiple partners to manage their inventory and fulfill the customer orders. So for managing inventories, retailers work with either in-house staff or 3PL or a combination of it.
Yep.
And these partners definitely have different processes to run their operations smoothly, which is good within their four walls. But what happens is it creates a network effect on the supply chain. And as a result, we have segmentation and silos. And now we're talking about fulfilling the orders. Retailers are working with last mile delivery partners to help them taking the order from their actual last hub, to the customer's house, right? And this is the moment that matters from the customer experience perspective, because the last mile is really important. So it is important for retailers that they have a good control over this crucial step of the journey that customer is going to take with that retailer. And unfortunately, what we are seeing nowadays is retailers are giving away their last mile fulfillment hastily to compete in this omnichannel world to inexperienced delivery companies or partners, and as a result, is affecting their customer experience.
Definitely. Definitely. Good points, Parth. So the next problem we're going to talk about, we'll switch back to you, Kevin. And again, we're kind of just continuing to evolve into all these problems affect each other.
Yep.
And kind of the next step, the next problem we're looking at is, it's a big challenge to balance customer needs or demand and also what, the maximum limits of your network. So really it's about balancing store inventory carrying cost, but also capacity at a store and DC level. So you want to talk more about that?
Yeah, so even in my, kind of definition, my own definition of omnichannel, I talked about having the inventory available to provide that convenience back to the customer. Obviously that comes at a cost, right? We can't just hold as much inventory as we want for every single item in the store, because that's not feasible, right? From a cost perspective and a capacity perspective. So being able to constantly deliver that customer experience and have the product available that the customer wants, not just from a buy online and ship to your address, but from a buy online, pick up in store. A lot of these different channels is key. From a cost perspective, there's a few different factors that you have to weigh. So one is the one that everyone's probably thinking about on the phone right now, which is safety stock, right? If you're exposing a lot of these different stores and fulfillment nodes to the web now, and we're not only fulfilling from our e-commerce DC, but we're fulfilling from the store now, you not only have to hold the inventory that you need for a certain item or even product category, but you need to hold safety stock to ensure that you're still able to fulfill that retail channel.
Yep.
So then the other kind of hidden costs, what I'll call them, is two different areas that I see a potential hidden cost in. One is being overstocked, what you do with that potential product, right? So if you think about it at a SKU level, even at a product category level, a lot of the retailers we work with have items that are highly seasonal, right?
Yep.
And if you miss the kind of your forecast on that, and you fill the stores with, we'll take one SKU, right? We'll say we forecasted and we plan for 100 units of this particular like summer dress at this store, right? If you're only selling through 50 of those units, what are you doing with the rest of that, right? If you can't use that inventory to fulfill potential other e-commerce orders or other types of orders, you're having to either sell that at a heavily reduced cost, or what brings me to my next point around transportation cost is you're going to have to ship that back to the distribution center and then figure out what to do with it there.
Yeah.
So I think from a cost perspective, you really need to look at that. And then the second point here is capacity, right? So a lot of retailers these days are doing things to really get customers in the store and increase that customer experience within the store. You look at a potential store in a mall, right, where there's not a lot of physical retail space.
Right.
They're doing everything they can to really maximize that floor space, get customers in, find new and exciting interactive ways to manage the customer within the store. And that means, we're not looking at a department store with, a large storage space where we can really use that as a distribution center. So
Yep.
When you're talking about planning in stores, and trying to fill those stores with inventory, you also have to take into account the physical constraints as well.
Yep, definitely. And what we've personally seen from some retail clients of ours is that they'll pick stores off some little extra backroom space as super filling stores to actually fulfill that need. But also that's, I think, a direct cause of this concept of the metro fulfillment center also emerging, because while stores can help, it may emerge to a point where you just need a dedicated fulfillment center, and that, of course, comes with a whole host of new challenges. So those are some great points, and the way that affects you, I think, Parth, from the supply chain perspective, is you're trying to balance all of those constraints on the store side, and that affects, inventory placement on the supply chain side, and therefore being able to position inventory in the best location for last mile fulfillment. So why don't you talk a little bit more about the challenges from that side?
Sure. So this challenge didn't exist, I guess, 10 years ago, where you had to worry about where to position your inventory because you put it to your DC,
Yep.
DC will push it to store. So that challenge
Much
didn't
easier
exist.
then.
Yeah, much easier then, right? So nowadays, and again, because of this new world, this has become my personal favorite challenge to tackle. So as a first step, let me establish a universal fact, right? Having inventory close to the customer is very critical for a short-term delivery. And in response, as we were evolving our initial days in omni-channel world, many retailers started using their stores to fulfill the orders. Definitely this allowed for rapid fulfillment of the customer orders, but let's be honest, store is expensive, real estate is expensive, so fulfilling those orders from stores is expensive. And this strategy also hurts what Kevin touched on was the right inventory balance between the omni-channel experience and in-store experience. So that has become a challenge. So to address that, there is a new evolution of the urban fulfillment centers, not the retail stores.
Yep.
So now retailers are exploring this urban fulfillment center where they're placing the high velocity items closer to the demand areas, right? And definitely this allows to fulfill the customer orders in a shorter delivery time. But again, new challenge, new problems. So what are the new challenges with this whole concept of urban fulfillment center that supply chain faces is retailers now have to have visibility in this all network nodes in their supply chain. If they do not have the visibility, they end up buying more inventory, which is never ever a good strategy, right? And again, there is another challenge to that is the urban logistics, which is another ball game. Let's not touch on it.
Right, exactly. That is a whole rabbit hole to go down.
Correct, yeah.
We don't have enough time today to even go down that rabbit hole. All right, so thanks, guys. That was really interesting to hear. I think it's pretty clear that while the challenges, you may view them in two different ways from a different perspective, they ultimately are interrelated, and it makes perfect sense that there should be some collaboration or full collaboration between you guys to really solve those challenges. And what we kept harping on throughout the conversation is really planning and inventory planning. The execution piece is a big focus in a lot of areas for retailers, and they're well on their way in that regard. But it's really important to ensure you got your planning side down as well, especially inventory planning. And in our research, we found that there's up to $15 billion a year that costs the retail industry due to poor inventory planning. And when these three departments you see on the screen, work in silos, that's where that problem comes out of. So having kind of had a long discussion about what the challenges are, we want to talk a little bit about, based on our experience, what we've seen retailers do successfully and what we view as sort of the next steps as to helping with this problem. And what we like to see as omnichannel without silos is, these three best practices, the three pieces of the puzzle that we view as important that need to be really the focus and what all those three teams that we just talked about need to work together to really help execute. The first piece of this puzzle that we're going to talk about, and this seems very basic, and you would think everyone would have this under control right now, but it's not necessarily the case, is what we found. And that is ensuring that you have airtight, incredibly accurate inventory visibility and management. That can take the form of ensuring you have rock solid POS or store inventory management systems in place for your warehouses, WMS systems in place. Of course, a lot of retailers, are working on that, and that's great. And that needs to, I think we see that a team at Bricz that needs to happen. But it's also important to note that people are a huge piece of that process as well. That the systems are important, but if you don't have your staff trained and ensuring that the best inventory management practices are happening, then it's all moot, right? Parth, I think this is pretty important to you because you mentioned it, as one of the challenges earlier on in the conversation. So you want to add a little bit color to this from the supply chain side?
Yeah, so you would, as you said, you would not believe there are many retailers right now still struggling with inventory visibility, even within their network up to the store. So it becomes really important to have this visibility, and the starting point to have the inventory visibility is basically hitting the nail on the head. And we need to be, or the retailers need to go up to the maturity level where the actionable insights they get from their multi-enterprise network. So that's the first step that I think I agree to the step that you just mentioned.
Definitely. The next two pieces they're really interesting to me because this is where, traditional systems that are on the market today may help resolve, but there's still a gap there. And that's where we see an interesting emergence of some niche providers and specific solutions powered by machine learning that can really help. So this is a pretty interesting topic for me. And I want to mention that this doesn't happen in any particular order, one or the other. It really kind of needs to happen in tandem. So order management or OMS systems, we're all well aware of what they do, and it's really, we see a lot of our customers are undergoing omnichannel initiatives, and it involves either initial implementation, right, Kevin, of an OMS system or some sort of upgrade. But what we want to kind of note is that there's a lot of work to be done in that space because order management traditionally was used as sort of a save-the-sale concept, right? The inventory is not available in the DC, then look to a store to maybe act as a backup, and that worked well for a while. Mm-hmm. But now we're at a point where you have upwards of 40 to 50 or more points of fulfillment, a mixture of stores and maybe dedicated fulfillment centers, and now you need the OMS to really, it needs much more of an intelligent brain in the middle of it to really determine exactly how to fulfill an order to minimize both transit time and cost. So the existing providers out there, we're well aware of Manhattan with Active Omni and IBM with Sterling. They're working to accomplish this. But what we have also seen is, Kevin, you and I attended a conference earlier this year, D3 in New York, and it was interesting because there's a lot of niche, little newer to the market niche providers that were helping to solve this concept. And two we came across was Select and Onera. Both of these guys use machine learning as a part of their platform. Select in particular does fulfillment optimization where it can plug into your existing OMS. And then using machine learning and optimization capabilities, it can determine what the best place to fill the order is to minimize cost and minimize the time to the customer. Onera does something similar as well, and Onera also actually handles you mentioned safety stock. Onera will handle safety stock as well. It can help in real time change that safety stock value to protect the in-store experience while ensuring and minimizing any order cancellation. So I know, Kevin, as the omnichannel guy, this is a pretty important topic to you as well. Do you want to talk, have any more points you want to add around that?
Yeah, so, at Bricz, we're working constantly with a lot of these next generation order management providers. And we've seen, a lot of these are moving toward what I like to call intelligent allocation.
Yeah.
You might call it optimization or something else. But really understanding a lot of different attributes and bringing those into the allocation process. So rather than the traditional very simple rules and going through templates and allocation based, right? It is taking a lot of these attributes, transforming them into a cost, and then allocating based on what is going to be the cheapest cost to me, right? And that might not only be shipping costs, but it might be something like your reject rate at a store that you're trying to allocate to, right? So as we're bringing in a lot more attributes and trying to allocate more efficiently than ever, it's still attacking the problem after the fact, I think. So
I would agree with that.
This is assuming that our inventory is where it is now, and based on our current inventory picture, this location that we're going to allocate an order to is the most efficient location to allocate that order to. Now, when you're looking at inventory positioning, making sure that your inventory is in the most ideal location before that order even hits, then you're going a step further, and where you go and allocate an order to might not have been the most efficient location had you had inventory in the most efficient location before.
That's extra forecasting too, right?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Great point. So the final piece of the puzzle we'll talk about, and it's certainly not last nor least, is real-time inventory positioning. And this is where what we see in our research at the Bricz team in our research and talking with customers is one of the bigger gaps between what's available out there and what really needs to be done to solve the challenges that you talked about, Kevin, of going beyond just allocation and really actually getting inventory exactly where it needs to be even beforehand to ensure that you're decreasing both your final mile cost and your time to customer. So, what's really needed here is people and processes. Both are two very key pieces of this puzzle and systems as well. So from a systems perspective, you really need to take it from what we see from a lot of our clients today is they use sort of age-old retail planning processes through, Oracle and these assortment applications or allocation applications, which solve the problem from a brick and mortar perspective, but or in many cases just Excel spreadsheets. But taking into account what you touched on earlier in the conversation, Kevin, which is forecasting at the fulfillment level, how it's actually fulfilled, how the customer, those systems don't necessarily meet that. So you really need a system that's going to be able to provide insight into forecasting all those different fulfillment channels. And the concept of doing pre-season planning where the quarter ahead of time, you plan out your inventory plan or replenishment plan to stores, which has been used for decades really as a strategy. It's going to get a lot more complicated now, and you really need something that's going to analyze in real time how inventory is positioned across your stores, your fulfillment centers, and determine any gaps between that and trending customer demand, and in real time make prescriptive, clear, actionable tasks or moves to move inventory between those fulfillment points to ensure you have the most optimal network in place. And to touch on the people side of things, what we see from a lot of clients when they're trying to address this challenge is they establish departments like omni-channel departments or customer experience departments to oversee, and they have some amount of power, I think, to be able to address the problems. But I think what we really see at Bricz is, in our philosophy of taking it to the next level, is establishing better leadership around solving that problem to unify those departments. We see the creation of a role, another C-level position, something along the lines of a chief inventory officer or chief network officer, which can help oversee these departments from the operations side and ensure that the inventory picture matched up and is cohesive based on all the data from all the individual departments, right? Transportation, distribution, the retail store network, all of that needs to work together. So, with that, we're going to kind of pose a question to everyone in the audience, and that's, are you really ready to conquer the great divide between your supply chain and your retail planning teams? And we're actually going to get into a little more detail about that in our next webinar, the Q3 webinar, so please make sure you join us for that. Right now, let's do a quick overview of what we talked about in this conversation. So omnichannel may have a different definition or is viewed differently amongst all the different sides of the organization, but it's really important that they're aligned and unified and the silos are broken down to ensure that everyone's on the same page and the customer experience is seamless. And with that, specifically what we've talked about today is how supply chain and retail planning have to work together to make sure that happens, because now the retail planning teams need to plan for inventory across both stores and fulfillment centers, and the supply chain team needs to make sure orders are getting out to the customer as fast as possible. And the best practices that we talked about from the Bricz team are ensuring airtight visibility, next generation order management capabilities, and finally, last but not least, or not last nor least, is next generation inventory positioning. All right. Okay, guys. So, Parth and Kevin, thank you guys so much for joining us. I really appreciate it. And at this point, for the last 10 to 15 minutes, I would like to open up the floor for questions. So the first question that I see was asked was, let's see, why is final mile important if you have an urban fulfillment network? Good question. All right. So kind of based on that, I think Kevin, you might be.
Yeah, I can go ahead and take that. So, I think it's, not just final mile, but also inventory positioning. I think it's really a combination of the two of those. So, one thing that we constantly talk about in the supply chain world, especially today, right, is speed, right? Not just speed and getting, your retail stores fulfilled quicker, but ultimately speed to the customer. So when we're talking about customer orders and you mentioned at the very beginning of the webinar today, the 2-day goal that a lot of retail companies are aiming for is a moving target, right? So it's not just going to be 2-day for the rest of time. It's moving toward 1 day. It's moving toward even same day in certain verticals. So as we're working toward that potential same day delivery goal, I think one, ensuring that your inventory is in the right location as you're expanding into that urban fulfillment network and adding more locations, ensuring that you have the right inventory available in those locations. And then step 2 of that is really utilizing, a lot of these last mile carriers, things like Uber delivery and Roadie and companies that. As you're moving towards same day, if you don't have the inventory available in those locations for those last mile carriers to pick up, then it's a moot point. So I think, first getting the inventory right, and then, utilizing that network of last mile carriers will increase the speed at which we're able to deliver to our customers.
Yep, and that further plays into the whole inventory challenge, right? Mm-hmm. Making sure that inventory is in place for those carriers to take it to the customers. All right, great. Thanks, Kevin.
Yep.
All right, so it looks like the next question we have is, what are some first steps that I can take in my organization to bridge supply chain and retail planning teams gap? All right, very good question. Parth, you want to take this?
Yeah, I'll take it.
Yeah.
So I think we have worked with many clients here at Bricz that this question has been posted to us many times. The first step that we highly recommend all our clients is to unify your systems. Make your systems talk to each other, get better visibility in your existing supply chain network. It's simple as that. If you have the visibility, you will know what to act on. And that's the recommendation I will give to as an answer to this question, that many retailers are working towards it, and that should be the first step to bridge this gap.
Great. Yeah, thanks, Parth. Okay, looks like we have one last question. Are there any strategies that customers can implement when evolving to an urban fulfillment optimization network? All right, great question. I think I'm actually going to tackle this one. And I kind of touched on it a little bit just earlier in the conversation. So it's really challenging to establish this, this new kind of urban fulfillment network because, like we mentioned, it involves so many different departments. And so you have omnichannel, you have e-commerce, fulfillment teams, you have retail teams, you have
the digital, chief digital officer is one we've seen a lot.
CX officer, CXO, that's another one we see a lot. And that's great, and it's definitely doing a lot for at least the front end of ensuring the cohesive customer experience. But I think what we see and what I touched on earlier is that there needs to be a new kind of form of leadership or around ensuring that urban fulfillment network is working optimally and the inventory is where it needs to be, both from stores and dedicated fulfillment centers. And we mentioned the chief network officer, the chief inventory officer can play that role. And that's from a leadership perspective, from a people perspective. And when we get into our systems and processes side of things, it's important that they oversee that, ensuring that these systems that today kind of work in silos, right? Transportation or carrier management. You have order management. You have your CRM, which is a treasure trove of customer data. And you have your merchandise planning systems that tend to focus very specifically on brick and mortar. But there's treasure troves of data amongst all of these systems, and all these systems remain important and continue to be used. But what we also see is that, we're talking about select and narrow these niche providers. There are opportunities for other solutions that specifically focused on certain tasks and can pull data from all of these three systems, all of these systems we just talked about, and take into account everything ranging from transportation costs to projected demand from your merchandising system to your customer experience, and actually make real-time specific recommendations on how the inventory picture needs to match up with that. And so that's it. Those are all the questions we have, and we'll go ahead and wrap it up. I want to thank everyone on the phone for joining us. I think this was really good. I really enjoyed this. It was really fun to kind of listen to guys what you had to say. So thanks, Parth and Kevin, for joining us.
Definitely.
Yep, thanks again, PJ.
Yep.
And if anyone on the phone has questions for Parth, myself, or PJ, feel free to send us a message afterwards, and we'd be happy to connect with you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Yep, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining, and everyone have a great rest of your day and week.